Hello and welcome to Day 9 Notes. Today we are solving quadratics by using the quadratic formula. Before we begin the lesson, go ahead and start your warm-up. You can pause the video now. Alright, for the problem on our warm-up, I'm going to solve it by completing the square. So first I will subtract 10 from both sides of the equation. I'm left with x squared minus 12x plus blank equals negative 10 plus blank. To find out what goes in that blank, we'll take our b value, which is negative 12, divide it by 2 and square it, which will give me 36. And I'll add 36 on both sides. I'll then factor the left side to x minus 6 squared, and then combine my like terms on the right side to give me 26. Now I'll take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root and the square cancels to leave me with x minus 6. And when I take the square root of 26, it only gives me the square root of 26. It doesn't simplify. But remember, square roots give you positive and negative answers. To finish out this problem, we will go over here and set x minus 6 equal to positive and negative square root of 26. And remember, you don't have to split it up into two equations when you are solving with a square root. It's not going to give you two different numbers per se. It'll still give you two different answers, but you don't have to write it that way. We'll just add 6 to both sides, and we get x equals positive 6 plus and minus the square root of 26. And this is our final answer. Alright, now we are going to talk about if we are unable to solve quadratic equations by factoring, square roots, or completing the square, then we can use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And before we can use that formula, we have to make sure that our equation is in standard form. Standard form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You have to make sure that your equation is not just in this form, ax squared plus bx plus c, but it has to be equal to 0 as well. Now we're moving on to number 1. The first thing that we are going to check is to make sure that number 1 is in standard form, where we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And that is true for this problem. So the first thing that I want to do here is to label my a, b, and c. I'll write it a equals, and a is the number before the squared variable, which is 12. B equals the number before just the b variable, which is negative 5. And c equals is my constant, which will be negative 12. So now I can plug my a, b, and c into the quadratic formula. Remember, my formula was x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And the biggest thing that I need to remember here is every time I replace a variable, I want to make sure to replace it with parentheses. So we'll start replacing it now. We have negative b. we keep that negative sign out front, and we'll put our b value in a set of parentheses. My b value here is negative 5. Then we have plus or minus the square root of b squared. So I take my negative 5, put it in parentheses with a square, minus 4 times a, which is 12, times c, which is negative 12. And all of this is over 2 times my a value, which is 12. Again, I want you to double check that every time that you put a value in, you've put that value in to parentheses. We don't want to lose any negative signs or mix anything up, so that's why we have to put everything into parentheses. And the good part about using the quadratic formula is that it goes directly into your calculator. So the first step for this problem is going to be to press the fraction button. So now we'll just start typing it in. We have negative b, which is negative 5, plus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times 12 times negative 12 all over 2 times 12. We'll press enter, and that gives me my first answer. You're probably thinking, what? First answer? Well, the reason that there's 2 answers is because we have to run my equation twice. That's because I have a plus and a minus before that square root. So I'll write my first answer up here. Put that calculator back on the board. So answer number 1 is, x equals 5 plus the square root of 601 over 24. And remember, I have to run it a second time. The first time I ran my problem, I ran it with a plus in front of my square root. The second time I'll run it, I will run it with a minus in front of the square root. So I just scrolled up to my problem, clicked on it again to bring it down, and I'm just going to change that plus to a minus and press enter. If you'll notice, the only thing that changed in this problem was the positive 601 changed to a negative 601. So I'm just going to write that here. Instead of having x equals 5 plus 601 over 24 and 5 minus the square root of 601 over 24, I'll just put a minus in the problem. And this is my final answer. Alright, now we're going to go over to problem 2. And I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to label my A, B, and C. So my A value is the number before my x squared term. And since there's not a number there, we know that that invisible number is 1. My B value is the number before the x term, and that's going to be the number negative 7. And my C value is my constant, which is negative 78. So now I'm going to plug this into the quadratic formula. You can look on the board to the left of the screen. There is going to be a quadratic formula on the board, so I'm not going to keep writing it every time in this video. So I'm going to write x is equal to negative b, we put that b in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. And all of that is over 2 times a. Now we're going to take this and put it into our calculator. Remember, the first step is that you need to press the fraction button. We do negative times negative 7 plus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 78 all over 2 times 1. My answer gives me x equals 13. Don't forget we have to run this a second time because we have to run it with a plus sign and a minus sign in front of that square root. So I'll scroll back to the top, click on my problem again, and if you press second back, it'll take you to the very beginning of the problem. You can click over a few and change that plus to a minus. Press enter, run it again, and it gives me negative 6. So this is the answer to number 2. All right, now we're going to start on number 3. You see, number 3 is not in the standard form version that we talked about earlier, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It's actually set equal to 16. And before we can solve our quadratics by using the quadratic formula, it has to be in standard form and set equal to 0. So to make this into standard form, I'll subtract 16 on both sides, and it'll give me 7b squared minus 8b minus 16 equals 0. And now I can go through and label A, B, and C. A is going to be 7. B is going to be negative 8. And C is negative 16, my constant number. Now I can plug my A, B, and C into the quadratic formula. So I have x is equal to negative b, should just be negative 8. And make sure you're putting that in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 8, minus 4a, which is 7, c, which is negative 16, all over 2 times 7. And again, I'm going to emphasize, every time I put a, b, and c into my quadratic formula, I used parentheses. Now you can go into your calculator. First step is to press the fraction button, and we'll type in our problem. Negative parentheses negative 8 plus the square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times 7 times negative 16, all over 2 times 7. So the first time that we ran this problem, I got 8 square root of 2 plus 4 over 7. So x equals 8 square root of 2 plus 4 over 7. And remember, I have to run it a second time with a minus sign instead of a plus sign. Scroll up, press enter, second, and the left arrow will take you to the beginning of the problem. Scroll over and change that plus to a minus. And it gives me negative 8 root 2 plus 4 over 7. So we can just rewrite that again. Negative 8 root 2 plus 4 over 7. Or if you remember what I said yesterday, we can just combine those into one problem. Positive and negative 8 root 2 plus 4 over 7 will be an okay answer as well.